what is the name of the Iowa women's basketball player who has set all the records?
So it's interesting. So I did the town hall moderator for my CNN thing was Caitlin Collins, who Nikki messed up. So when I started the event, I actually had a Caitlin Clark jersey, or it was a shirt with her name on it, and I handed it to Caitlin Collins, and I said, you know, with all due respect to Miss Collins, if I need a buzzer beater made, I'm going with Clark over I want to thank my friends Chip and Tom Massey for being here. You know, we are so frustrated with everything that goes on in Washington, and quite frankly, frustrated with a lot of these Republicans who are not following through and doing what they said they would do, and not changing things the way I have in Florida and the way Governor Reynolds and your legislature has delivered for you here in Iowa. But these guys are towing the line. You know, they stand up and fight when it's not easy, and they're really fighting for you. I mean, they have their own districts, but they're fighting for every American who has our shared values. And Florida has millions of more people now than than New York. That's the closest state to us population-wise. So millions more people in Florida, yet Florida's budget is half the size of New York's budget. And yet, we have the lowest percentage of state government workers per capita in the entire country. And yet, when people move from New York to Florida, what do they tell me? They say, oh my gosh, your roads are nicer, your services are better, your schools are better. Well, how are we able to do this with half the footprint? Because so much of government is not essential. Government grows and grows, just like Ronald Reagan said, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government bureau. We are in jeopardy of being the first generation of Americans that is going to leave to our kids and grandkids in America less prosperous and less free than the one we inherited. We beat the Democrats on election integrity. We have universal voter ID, ban ballot harvesting, ban Zuckerbucks, and we make sure that if people violate election law, they can be prosecuted, and the result is we count millions and millions of votes on the day of the election and report the results at night in a very transparent and efficient process. That's what should be done in every state across this country. We've also beat the left on banning China from buying land in the state of Florida. No farmland, no land near military bases, none of it. And so we as Republicans need to start winning again. Republicans have won in Iowa, Republicans have won in Florida, but they haven't won a lot of other places. I mean, we should have 56 senators. We have 49 senators. We've been losing races. But then when you get in, you've got to deliver on these promises. You know, if you're promising to build the wall, build the wall. If you're promising to drain the swamp, you know, drain the swamp. And I did a town hall on CNN the other night, and I was asked about this issue regarding illegal aliens and so-called birthright citizenship. And basically, you know, the 14th Amendment was enacted to overturn the Dred Scott versus Sanford case, which was a very bad decision, to ensure that African Americans were citizens of the U.S. And so that was the right thing to do. That has kind of been interpreted to say you can come into the country illegally across the border, have a kid, and all of a sudden that's an American citizen, and that creates an incentive for people to come illegally. So I don't think that's the right way to do it, and I said that I'm going to address it. But you know, Donald Trump ran on 2016 saying the exact same thing. He said he was going to do an executive order that was going to challenge this issue of illegal alien birthright citizenship. It would get litigated, but he would do it. So he had 4 years. All he had to do was sign his name to this order, and he never did it. You can have the best Constitution in the world, you can have the best Declaration of Independence in the world. These things do not run on autopilot. They require every generation of Americans to step up and fight for freedom, and sometimes put on a uniform, risk your life, and even give the last full measure of devotion for service to this country. Now, we're not called upon to make sacrifices of that nature here in this political season. But what we are called upon to do is to do justice to the sacrifices of the people who lay in places like Arlington. What we are called upon to do is to preserve what George Washington called the sacred fire of liberty. This is a fire that burned in Independence Hall in 1776 when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to establish a new nation conceived in liberty. It's a fire that burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, when our nation's first Republican president pledged this nation to a new birth of freedom. It's a fire that burned on the beaches of Normandy when a merry band of brothers stormed the shores, defeated the Nazis, and preserved liberty throughout the world. It's a fire that burned at the foot of the Berlin Wall in 1987 when a resolute Republican president stood in front of that wall and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," leading to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This is our responsibility, to carry this torch and to preserve this sacred fire of liberty.
In Iowa this week, we obviously had a school shooting. And it's not a gun issue, but a mental health issue. And we have that in this country where we need better mental health. I think we need to go back to some of the institutionalization. What is your view on that?
Look, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, well, first, anytime you see something like that, your hearts go out to the families. I mean, to have a sixth grader shot by some nut who's in school, it's an absolute travesty, and it should not be happening. And as the father of young kids, schools need to be safe. We've worked a lot on this in Florida, and we've had great results. But it's something that ever since the Columbine. I remember that. I mean, I think I was in college, and this Columbine, and it was almost like, that became something where people that have a screw loose, they would target schools. So that's part of the reason we've done a lot on school security, because schools were viewed as a soft target by some of these people, and I think that's important. But the mental health aspect is significant, because when you see these people, they have very similar profiles. This was somebody who was really hopped up on this gender ideology, and you saw it in the profile. The media doesn't want to talk a lot about that because it doesn't fit their narrative, but the reality is we've now seen that in a number of different places. You've seen other folks have different types of mental issues where they were clearly talking about doing things that are very, very bad. And so a couple things. Yes, mental health, but particularly in the schools, because this was a 17-year-old student. And it ranges from people that may be a danger to society, which obviously, for protection of everybody else, there needs to be an intervention there. But it also is just kind of run-of-the-mill students that go through issues in life to be able to have resources there that are good and solid. And unfortunately, so my wife has gotten involved in helping the schools in Florida in a good way. Unfortunately, what you find through all this is the left will use some of this mental health stuff to advance the woke agenda. That's a dead end, okay? When you're talking about people that need help, you want that to be on the up and up. You don't want to use that as a leverage to try to advance the agenda. So I think that's important. But I do agree on the institutionalization. Not to say that this is going to be like everybody, but there used to be more people in institutional settings, way more as a percentage, and we've gone in a total other direction. So when I look at places like the streets of San Francisco, and I see all these people doing this, it's like, that's not a housing problem. That's ultimately a mental health problem that's led them there. So I think it runs the gamut. And veterans, of course, 22 suicides a day. When I was in Iraq, so that was 2007. So 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq, all that stuff had been going on. I'd be with Marines, and I was, attached to Navy SEALs, so the special operators, U.S. soldiers, so many of them had been on multiple deployments since 9/11. 4 or 5 deployments just since 9/11, like a 6-year period. That's not normal. And so that's a lot of burden on a very small. Of course you're going to have invisible wounds of war. Of course you're going to have things like post-traumatic stress. So and what happens with the VA was the VA and a lot of people focus on pharmaceutical interventions for these folks. That is look, I'm not saying it can never work for people, but I've just seen enough where that doesn't work for a lot of people. And so you've got to have a different approach. So for example, in Florida, we have a group that trains service dogs to be paired with veterans with post-traumatic stress. And you know what? They recognize the symptoms, they help alleviate, and the suicide rate plummets when you have situations like that. So that's something that we've got to do, but we do need, I think, more institutional settings, especially from people that are posing a threat to society, because they'll be better off in the institutional setting as well. But then it also is the protection of the public. When we had in Florida, this was before I was governor, I was running at the time in 2018, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, and terrible shooting. Law enforcement did not respond properly. in Dallas County, it seems like the response was good. It was not the case with that. So that was an issue. But when the shooting happened and the news broke, people in that community, without knowing any identity published of who it was, they all thought it was the guy that it actually was, because he had been somebody that had been viewed as likely to do something like this. People didn't want to intervene. So we have things like behavioral threat assessment tools that schools can work with local law enforcement on to see, because these are rare, but they're serious. And so you got to do, and the security is great, and we need to do that. But man, if you have somebody that has these warning signs from a mental health perspective, have an intervention, or even from a criminal perspective, because the guy from Parkland, he should have been prosecuted for different crimes throughout this whole thing. So, but schools, I think, need to be safe. We've put more resources in Florida than just about anyone, I think, and it's something that I'm happy to do, because as a dad, I understand how important it is to parents.
Thank you.
That's what I did for my profession, was work on Mercy Hospital here in Dubuque, and then I taught nursing, and I taught in the mental health area. So, first of all, I agree with your view that we do need more institutionalized settings, and I agree, I applaud you for what you do in the schools. I think those are all good things. But to play devil's advocate, this is my question. What, is the United States the only country in the world that has mental health problems? Why is it that we have such a high percentage of murders with guns in this country comparatively with other industrialized countries?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how it breaks down in terms of these other countries. I just haven't looked at that. But I will say this. I don't have the answer per se, but I do think, you know, the role of pharmaceutical interventions, I think that there's culture. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. You know, but back in like the 40s and 50s, kids used to go to school and bring a rifle. I mean, yeah, I mean, like they would do that. And so, you know, it's like you didn't have this happening then, when literally they're bringing this to school. So what has happened since then? I think some of it now with social media and mass media, I mean, people know if they commit one of these horrible things, they're going to be famous. They're going to be put on TV. They can put a manifesto on social media and all this stuff. And so it's created, I think, a really nasty set of incentives for people that want to kind of go out in a blaze of glory that you wouldn't probably have had, you know, 50, 60 years ago. So there is some underlying issues here. I also just wonder, you know, we have a fatherlessness crisis in this country. You know, how is that playing in to some of these troubled youth in terms of, did they have the right mentorship there? We have a fatherhood initiative in Florida to promote fatherhood, get fathers involved, but if you can't, because, you know, there's kids that have their dads in prison, we want to promote mentorship, because sometimes all the difference could be someone takes an interest in a young kid's life, and that could change everything for them. So we're going to restore the government to its rightful owners, which is we the people, but that means you got to go in, use power under Article 2 to reduce the size and the scope of the bureaucracy, to hold bureaucrats accountable, to lay off bureaucrats, fire bureaucrats, and it's going to take a much different posture than what we've seen with previous presidents. You know, Donald Trump, he kept a lot of Obama holdovers in things like the National Security Council. I can tell you this, every Biden holdover on day one when I'm president is gone. But we also need to look, because I think, like, okay, Washington doesn't work for us, it works for itself. That's why 5 of the 8 wealthiest counties in our country are suburbs of Washington, D.C. That didn't happen by accident. But so why don't you have more people like Chip and Tom Massey that are really standing on principle, fighting all this stuff? And it's just because the incentives are to produce the results that we've been getting. All the behaviors incentivized to benefit the swamp at the expense of the American people. So yes, I'll go in there, I'll clean house, these guys will help me, but I think you need some structural reforms long term. You need term limits for members of Congress. Yes. We're going to work for that. You need a balanced budget requirement for the U.S. Constitution, just like Florida has to do it. You should do it here. We also need to give the president what's called the line item veto.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
as governor, when they put a budget on my desk, I can line out and veto individual port projects. So, with the president can't do that. So think about it. They'll put a big spending bill on the president's desk. You can either fund everything or fund nothing. So that's why your money goes to do things like promote transgenderism in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Because you can't do. So if you had president line and veto, you could hack out so much stuff.
Yeah.
Veto all funding for the United Nations. You can do it. You have to do it through Article 5 with the state. So you go state by state. Florida's already certified. Other states have certified these things. I'll use the bully pulpit to go. Hopefully we'll have more red legislatures. But I think even the blue legislatures would do term limits. So we're going to do that. We know it's part of a process. No one's tried to actually do it with presidential leadership. So I'm going to do it. Another thing, and I know Chip's been involved in this, is you look at like what these members of Congress are doing with like trading stocks and stuff. It's like Pelosi should be running a hedge fund with how much, I mean, like unbelievable returns. It's like, so he has legislation I support. Because when I first got elected, I sold my stocks. I never made, I've not since I've been in elected office made a trade. Because I don't want people to be saying, oh, you're doing this for this. And so you just sacrifice that. And so, but he has things to say, members of Congress should not be doing these individual stock trades. You could put it in like a blind trust or whatever, or 401k, but to do that, I think it's created huge amounts of distrust. And then the other thing that I was a big supporter of and would love to see is a proposed 28th Amendment to the Constitution that says very simply, Congress shall make no law respecting the citizens of the United States that does not also apply to members of Congress themselves.
Would you support decriminalizing cannabis and allowing citizens of the United States of America true medical choice?
So we have medical marijuana in Florida as part of our Constitution. Do you have it in Iowa or no? No.
Program here.
You know, it's, I think the places that have done it for recreational use, like Colorado, I don't think it's worked well. I think it's caused problems in the cities. I think it's created a black market. And so I think that, so we'll respect the decisions that the states make on that. But I do think some of these places like California and Colorado, I don't know what they did with it, but I mean, it has definitely caused a negative impact on their workforce. But on medical freedom, so we did this during COVID, where, you know, we banned all the COVID shot mandates. You should not have to choose between a job you need and a shot you don't want. And so we protected everybody on that. We made sure that in Florida, we enacted protections. You have a civil right to breathe air. So they cannot force you to wear a mask against your will. You can choose, but they cannot make you do that. And I think that's important. We also banned any of the COVID shot requirements for school children because they wanted to mandate it then. There's no evidence that the school kids need to be taking the COVID shot. But I think we need, going forward, to bring a reckoning to the federal government and everybody that was involved in this disastrous COVID response, from Fauci to CDC to NIH, FDA. It's been a total disaster with how it's gone. In fact, if you think about it, the FDA, these bureaucrats, when they work and approve these things, their next job is almost always with Big Pharma. And so why did they approve COVID jabs for 6-month-old babies? There was no evidence that that was beneficial for 6-month-old babies. Forget about anything that could potentially negative happen, and yet they hotline that through. Why would they have done that? Well, it's because these companies are going to make money off that. Now, very few parents are doing it for their young kids because I think they've looked at the data and they've realized that that's not appropriate. Our Surgeon General in Florida was the first one to say that the most recent approval for whatever the most recent booster is, he's done the analysis and says, you know, that there was not an adequate basis to approve it to begin with, and now there's other questions regarding potential safety. So he's called for that authorization to actually be revoked and for it to be pulled off the market. But here's the thing. you don't know whether they're doing it on the up and up because the incentives are really, really bad with what. So we're going to stop the revolving door between FDA and big pharma. We're going to clean out all the politics out of the CDC and the NIH. And we're going to protect you so that this never happens to our country ever again. We are fortunate to have built the best organization that anyone's been able to build for an Iowa caucus. We've gone to all 99 counties. We've answered questions. We've shaken hands. We've done it. We've articulated a great vision for this country. And that is what does it when you're talking about these Iowa caucuses. So I'm asking for your support. I'm asking you to round up more folks and bring them there on caucus night. I tell you, if everyone here who's committed to caucus with us brings 2 extra people, you are going to see an earthquake on January 15th. So thank you for your support. God bless you for your support. And I can tell you this, you can talk to folks in Florida that voted for me in the primary when I ran in 18, even that didn't vote for me, they will say, man, this guy delivered far beyond anything I ever imagined. That's what we'll do for you as president. Thank you.